Okay, so an entitled douche just made a video on Abraham Lincoln. So basically, if y'all know who this guy is, it's some Rageaholic guy. Some people call him Razor Fist, but this guy just made the worst video, the worst historical video I've probably ever seen in my entire life. And now, obviously, I'm not going to go through this entire video, but I'm going to go to random parts of the video and just pick at what this guy's saying and why it's wrong. And I'm not a historian, I'm not a professional. I'm not going to try to say I know everything because I don't. But I know the basic facts and the basic perspectives of history at the time, which this guy blatantly ignores.
Interpretation. This ain't an agree to disagree situation, sunshine. Abraham Lincoln was America's first dictator.
He was not a dictator. To say that Abraham Lincoln was a dictator at the time, you'd have to say the Confederacy was a dictator. You had to say every country on earth was a dictator. Okay, and I saw an argument from some wannabe Confederate saying that Lincoln was a dictator because he wanted railroads through states without asking permission. He wanted a nationwide railroad, and they're like, "Oh, he's a dictator." Like, you can't have a functioning country if you're not able to do anything. And, to say that states' rights matters when you have people held in bondage, it's pretty ignorant to say. You're just ignoring the entire perspective of history. Put yourself in the 1850s, the 1860s, and see how hypocritical it would be to talk about states' rights when you literally have millions of people in slavery.
Lifelong and avowed advocate of centralized, authoritarian, top-down government, overseeing a nation whose government was repeatedly and explicitly described by its founders as being derived not from a federal government, but its member states, who in turn...
If you don't have a federal government, you'll just have a bunch of smaller governments. Okay, that's what a state is. It's a smaller government. So instead of having one dictator, you'll have 50 dictators. Okay? If you have a good president, which Abraham Lincoln obviously was for his time, then you have nothing to worry about. But if you have a bunch of smaller countries with even a single dictator in it, then you could open the door for just endless war, like we saw in the World Wars, World War One, World War Two, and it's not like America is culturally, you know, just divided. We all share the same language. We all share the same culture. We pretty much all share the same history. Our ancestors got here um, to this country somehow from another part of the world. Most of us, like 99.9% of us, migrated here somewhere along our ancestry, and we came here for a better life. Unless you were descended from a slave, which my ancestors were. But even after that, once you're free, you can still look for a better life. So we all have the same ancestry. And most of us have intermingled with each other and left our state at some point, left our little community. We're not these isolated tribes. So to have a state's rights really makes no sense. Really makes no sense if you're not doing it at a democratic level. If as long as everybody gets a vote, as long as everybody has a say, each state has a say, which they did, but they just lost, is the solution to just say, I'm going to secede and then attack federal buildings? I'm going to revolt and terrorize huge sections of the population? and then wage a war where hundreds of thousands of people die for states' rights? Really? And states' rights to do what? To own slaves.
Are enthralled to their citizenry. And if Andrew Jackson, himself something of an authoritarian, was the first of the non-founding father presidents, Lincoln represents a philosophical dividing line between the limited and enumerated federal powers of the original plural United States and the globalist goddamn empire we're suffering the adverse effects of at present. And that, I believe, more than anything, is the explanation for why Lincoln...
Notice how he just rambles on. He just keeps rambling and rambling and rambling because he doesn't want to give the viewer the time to think about the BS that he's saying. You can rant. This is what dumb people think smart people sound like. This guy is just a pseudo historian. Just egotistical, smug. And he's dressed like he's in a biker gang. He's not dressed like he goes to libraries. He reads books. He's wearing shades inside, so I know he's not reading books. This is where you want to get your history information from? This is ridiculous.
Is the sacred cow to end all sacred cows. It's not about who he was, the war he fought, or even about him getting domed in a fucking theater for his trouble. It's about what he represents philosophically.
Philosophically. I mean, he had no choice. Okay, if you're, let's say you've just been elected president and you have a huge portion, like 1/3 of the country, that is saying we're going to break away from you. We're going to ignore the democratic system. And not only that, we're going to be hostile towards the people up north. We don't want anything to do with you. And we'll just loot and attack all your buildings. Like literally, they were just looting federal buildings, looting for weapons. And they're funding an army. What are they for? What do they need weapons for if they are just peaceful? So, and not only that, but they fire the first shot and, attack a federal building. That's an act of war. And it's not like it was attached to the actual state. It was a little island, a little fort. What reason do they have to attack? And a lot of people say, oh, but they were funding, or they were dropping off troops and weapons. Yeah, that's kind of what a fort does. That's kind of the purpose of a fort, to drop off troops and weapons, especially when you're right next to a hostile territory that just broke away from you and says they don't believe in the democratic system, they believe in slavery, and you don't believe in slavery, so that means they hate you. Is that where we're going?
Down governance. To cut a novel into a novella, if Lincoln was wrong, so is our ruling class. And their every illegitimate edict will come tumbling after. Which is why it's so very
Now, what does this have to do with history? This is just his opinion. This is literally just his opinion. Now, what does the 21st century have to do with the Civil War? He's comparing 21st century politics, where we have computers, we have this complex, there's been thousands of other laws written since then. Is this really where he wants to go? He wants to go to I'm going to compare the 21st century to the Civil War and then base it off 21st century ideology and political stances. It's stupid. Who's listening to this guy? That's what I want to know.
Unfortunate that he absolutely fucking was. But I can hear you already criticizing Lincoln. What are you?
That's a straw man argument. That's literally textbook straw man. Textbook straw man. People aren't criticizing you because you don't like Lincoln. People aren't criticizing you because you're twisting and distorting and rewriting history. You're painting a man of his time in a bad light and judging him off the times of today. You can't do that. That's like saying George Washington, he was some sort of evil authoritarian dictator. He didn't believe in the rights. He did all this, but while it's at the same time ignoring all the good things he did. That's literally what this guy's doing.
Lost Causer? Chapter.
I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because I don't want to hear this guy. He's so annoying. Imagine having this guy as your roommate. That would be the worst thing ever.
Emancipation not included. And before you expectorate the age-old apologist Chestnut, he was a man of his time, or that I'm applying
He just talked about this stuff. Yes, he was a man of his time. Yes, that's like comparing a caveman to somebody born in the 21st century. Obviously, there's going to be differences. Should you judge that person off of, being a caveman? Or should you judge that person off of being somebody born in the 21st century, even though they're a freaking caveman?
contemporary critique to a man over a century dead and dusted, this was very much a prevailing view of Lincoln, even in his own time. Major newspapers, both in America and abroad, chided it as toothless posturing, and Lincoln's own Secretary of State, William Seward, mocked his own boss and his proclamation in a private letter saying, quote, "We show our sympathy with slavery by emancipating slaves where we cannot reach them and holding them in bondage where we could set them free."
Yes, because if they did free the slaves in the North without winning the war, they run the risk of the slave states in the North joining the Confederacy. That's a real risk. Politicians aren't supposed to tell the truth. They're not supposed to do things they really want. So this guy's arguing, oh, Lincoln, he didn't free the slaves, he didn't care, he's a tyrant, he's a dictator, and then he's going to argue Lincoln didn't do enough. So either he's a tyrant or a dictator for doing whatever he wants to do, but this guy's blaming Lincoln for not doing enough. Doesn't make any sense.
Unquote. But if it sounds like a limp law for chest-puffing purposes, I assure you, it's infinitely more nefarious than that. As I mentioned, the North was losing the war badly, like 15 straight months of losses.
They weren't losing the war. When you have all your industrial cities captured, when you have like a huge portion of your male population killed or wounded, when you have low morale, when you have no sort of navy, when your leaders are all terrible, which I will agree with that part. The leaders of the Union were terrible, but they still had Lincoln. They might have had bad generals, but they still had a good leader. There was really nothing for you to say the Union was losing. They just lost battles. And losing a battle isn't the same as losing the war. Towards the end of the Civil War, once the Confederacy had their Atlanta taken, they had most of their industrial equipment destroyed. Their population could barely feed itself. The generals, they were all on the run. They were deserters. People fleeing, couldn't replace their losses, didn't even know why they were fighting anymore, because first it's states' rights, then it's like, okay, now we gotta enact more authority measures because we gotta go to war with the Union. Everybody listened to this one guy, Andrew Johnston, and do whatever he says so we can win this war. So that really defeats the whole purpose of states' rights. This guy's a clown.
is interrupted only by one minor victory and a single stalemate. Perhaps no battle better typifies the state of miserable desperation President Lincoln found himself in when the document was drafted than the aforementioned Battle of Fredericksburg.
For 8 hours on December 13th, 1862, the Union forces at Fredericksburg, under General Ambrose Burnside's command, had been decimated by Confederate General Robert E. Lee's troops.
Ambrose Burnside was beside himself on the evening of the battle that nothing had gone right from the outset. Nothing had even promised the victory that he had hoped for.
Where despite the Union outnumbering the Confederacy 121,000 to 80,000, the Union took more than 2 times the casualties and were forced into full retreat under cover of night.
This is one single battle in the whole war. And the difference between the Confederacy and the Union, and this is common middle school history, the difference between the Confederate and the Union was the Union could replace its losses. The Union could bounce back after a loss. But look at Gettysburg. As soon as the Confederacy lost one time, the entire pattern of the war changed. They couldn't come back. It was a turning point. They were so morally, spiritually, and just defeated on a military level, they couldn't come back. And it wasn't even that big of a loss. But it was a loss enough to knock them off their feet. So just to base a war, an entire war filled with thousands of battles on one battle, it's not going to be good, especially when you're trying to criticize the winning team.
So when one member of the English press wrote that the Emancipation Proclamation was merely a matter of, quote, Lincoln playing his final card, no one understand they were A1 fucking right.
That's one guy's opinion in the 1860s. How's that a fact? Okay, you gave me one guy's opinion. That doesn't mean it's true. You're not using logic to explain. You're just showing me quotes. Okay, that's the problem with this guy. He's just showing quotes and then putting his own opinion on it without using logic. And then he says it in this emotional tone that really just sounds like propaganda. And, you know, this guy's a lost causer. This guy's, he wishes the Confederacy won. Don't even lie. The way this guy just says the Confederacy, they're innocent victims. They just wanted to be free. They just wanted to succeed. No, they were literally a terrorist organization because literally decades after the war ended, guess what the South was doing? They were lynching. They were rioting. They were burning things down. They were bombing. They were saying, oh, we need to exterminate these people. They were putting hundreds of thousands of black people in, slavery, because slavery did not end after the Civil War. He's right on that point. But, who was doing it? The South. The South was taking random black people and putting them in prison. And not only putting them in prison for faulty charges, they didn't get a fair trial. The South was doing this. And why did they do this? Because of the mindset of the Confederacy.
But if it wasn't about freeing slaves in the South, because it didn't, and Lincoln explicitly forbade freeing slaves in areas held by the Union, what the hell was it supposed to accomplish? Oh, nothing much. Just government-mandated rape and murder. See, with the bulk of fighting men away, fighting for the Confederacy in the South, the plantation's daily management, for the most part, fell to female members of the family. Wives, in particular. See where I'm going with this? Lincoln wasn't declaring Southern slaves free. He was telling them to rise up and murder the primarily female managerial class of said plantations in the hopes that engineering a full-blown revolt would weaken.
So this guy's arguing that Lincoln wanted the black slaves to rise up and kill white women. That's his argument, which never happened, besides for a few revolts. But, during the Civil War, there wasn't really any revolts, really. People just wanted to escape. People just packed up their stuff and left. They didn't kill white women. Like this guy's saying, like, oh, Lincoln wanted, the killer slaves, the black slaves, they're gonna rise up and kill the white woman. Like, what? That never happened. That's pseudo history. They just packed up and left. If everybody's busy fighting and they have a chance to go, they're gonna go. Okay? It's not about vengeance. Unlike the Confederacy, how they enacted a reign of terror for over 100 years. It wasn't about revenge. The slaves literally just wanted to be free. They didn't want revenge. They didn't want any of this stuff. Just wanted to be free.
Economic production enough to give a much-needed edge to the Union in a time when they were losing. It wasn't so much a Hail Mary as a call to murder and fucking deflower her.
So, he's saying they're gonna rape her? So now this guy's claiming black men are going to rape white women. This is a huge no. Back then, that was almost unheard of. There was zero proof black men raped white women, okay? Back then. This is ridiculous. This guy's putting forth false history, and he's inserting these little crumbs to this audience, like, yeah, they're gonna rape your white woman, wink wink, they're gonna freaking rise up and burn down your entire village. Where's the documentation? Can he document a historical fact besides like Nat Turner and a few others that can't be directly ascribed to Lincoln? And where's your proof that Lincoln was even trying to incite murder within the Confederacy or revolts? He didn't want revolts. He just wrote a law, said, okay, you're free now. And there you go. It inspired people to leave, not freaking murder people. Okay, this guy, look at his smug face. And, I'm sorry that I didn't make some sort of superficial edit of this video. I'm just going with the flow. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do a video like this on the fly. Because this guy is literally saying, yep, black men, they're gonna murder and rape your white women just because there's not a man in the home watching them. They need to be watched all the time. And the funny thing is, this guy claims to be a non-lost causer, which definitely isn't true. This guy's literally parroting lost cause ideology. And if you guys don't know what lost cause ideology is, it basically means, yeah, the South were the good guys in the war. The war wasn't about slavery. The war was about states' rights. The Union, they were a tyrannical occupying force. The slaves had it good. Black people were good under the Confederacy's wing. Nobody back then was racist. They loved black people. Union was actually the racist. Or Lincoln was actually the racist. That's what this guy is saying.
So much a Hail Mary as a call to murder and fucking deflower her. A London news.
So this guy is literally saying deflower. That means rape. Wow, that's insane. That's insane. And there's people in the comment section that actually think this is like the best most mind-blowing thing ever. And there's even black people in the comment section saying it frustrates me that none of this was ever taught in American history. Black people are conditioned to worship this man and his proclamation without ever even researching. Sorry, I have a stuffy nose. So I might sound different. But yeah, this guy, and God bless this man. He honestly thinks he's exiting the Matrix. He's like, wow, I'm leaving the Matrix. I'm seeing things from a different point of view, which is not a different point of view, because this ideology has been around for hundreds of years. Lost cause ideology is the primary ideology of post-war South. There's nothing groundbreaking, there's nothing exclusive about thinking the things this guy is saying. And even in the North, people actually think that the ideology of the lost cause is the truth of the Civil War. There's thousands of teachers that teach this. They're saying, oh, I never learned this at school, but there's thousands of teachers teaching. The teacher I had in school, they used to always parrot, oh, this, it was about states' rights, it was about not being taxed, tariffed, all this other BS. I don't think I've watched one slavery documentary in school. Never. Yet this guy's talking like it's oh, mind blown. This is some stuff you learn in elementary school. And it's not true.
Newspaper, The Spectator.
So I'm going to skip ahead because this guy is just talking nonsense. I'm going to skip to the halfway point.
Corpus suspended, you can and will be arrested without trial. And many, many were. We all know about this.
It's literally a war. It's a war. If this guy thinks this is bad, wait until he sees what happened in World War II. They literally made you work in factories. They made all the businesses under the wing of the government. They said, you're now owned by the government. You have to sign up for this war. You have no choice. You have to. And this guy also goes into the video talking about, oh, why did Lincoln have a draft? Why did Lincoln have a draft? He talks about this in this video. I'm not sure the exact point in time where he says that, but he complains about Lincoln having a draft. Yeah, that's literally how you win a war. If you're waging a war based on killing people, who can kill the most people, yes, you're going to have to do some unethical things. If the United States goes to war with, let's say, Canada. Let's say that Canada. Do you think the country that just takes years to get something done through a bureaucracy is going to win? Or do you think the person who has the smartest man in charge, willing to do things on the fly in the shortest time possible, do you think that they're going to win? This was a war of annihilation. The South was marching towards Washington. They were going to burn it down. They were going to burn the Constitution to shreds. So yeah, you got to do some drastic things. And I'm not saying this is right. In peacetime, this is a huge no-no. You're not supposed to have emergency powers. A lot of emergency powers now, it's a huge no-no that they should have ended, like the Patriot Act. It should have ended a long time ago, but we still have them. But back then, when you're in a war of this scale where 500,000 people died, you're going to have to do some questionable things. And people might not like that, but that's the truth. It's either kill or be killed. One nation against a rebelling faction that's going to destroy the entire way of life.
Southern secession, but there was very nearly a central confederacy to go along with it, largely comprised of non-slave-holding border states such as Maryland, who sympathized with Southern grievances like the abrogation of the right of secession.
Now, how come that never happened? because they won the war. They were winning the war. The South lost the war. That never happened. Just because there might have been some people at some point in time during the war that wanted to create a second middle confederacy, does it add to your... What is this even supposed to be about? What are you even arguing here? What does that have to do with Lincoln being a dictator? And notice how during the entire video he's judging him by modern standards. By modern standards, you're going to judge a president in the 1800s.
And excessive tariffs and taxation. So aggrieved were the residents of Maryland that the state legislature began holding debates on the merits of seceding themselves. Lincoln flipped his fucking shit. The legislature acceded to his wishes and publicly declared they would not be voting on secession. Only for totally not a dictator Abraham Lincoln to arrest the entire...
Now, where's his sources on this? Abraham Lincoln crushes civil liberties in Maryland. What website is this? By Michael. I'm just saying a name. That's literally just a name. Michael Squirbeard. Whatever that says. And it's a blog post. His source is a blog post. Wow. But if this is true, obviously that's bad. But you know, during World War II, we had an entire propaganda department. There was nothing allowed you could say against the war. Absolutely nothing you could say against the war. It was a whole effort with the entire country coming together. A whole effort with the entire country. You could not speak out against the war. You could not protest against the war. Why not call that stuff out rather than one instance of some borderline secessionist getting arrested? And they were secessionists, which means they were a threat to the Union, so maybe they did need to get arrested.
State legislature of the state of Maryland all the same, those who didn't fucking flee anyway. A Maryland judge determined the president was not within his constitutional authority to do any of the above, a judgment which Lincoln elected to leave on red, and did it anyway. The local press pitched a fucking...
Now, where is his sources? Again, I'm not a historian. This is just my opinion on this particular video. I'm not saying... So let's read. Blah, blah, blah. And people have been calling out this guy for his bibliography. He's referencing like economist born like 100 years after the Civil War as a source. He's literally referencing books from Southerners born hundreds of years after the Civil War as a primary source.
Fit with one...
And I'm not even one of the guys that, you know, obsess over sources. But when it comes to history, you kind of have to have a source. That's a must, because this is history. This is about what really happened at that point in time. For you to just reference just novels and books that have nothing to do with actual history aren't sources. That's ridiculous. That just shows you don't care. So I'm going to stop the video. I might make a part 2. But, you know, I'm kind of sick, so my nose is stuffy, so I'm going to stop. And, you know, if you like the video, like, comment, and subscribe.